This guy's garage. Like and subscribe.
I'm pleased with some of the recommendations you have to strengthen this bill. First off, with my background, I completely support the idea of having public oversight of law enforcement. I think it's absolutely necessary to maintain trust in that institution. But I do have some concerns that I'll get to those in a minute. So currently, what are your timelines for getting complaints resolved using the CCRC on average?
On average. So you're talking about
the CRCC, sorry.
So using my own resources.
Yes. What do you have? What you got going right now?
So it's it depends on the obviously on the complexity of the complaint. When we look at Bushi, we were the time to get the report to the commissioner was around 20 months. Okay. Which was a very complex investigation.
But on average, what are you looking at? A couple, 3 months, 5 months?
Standard complaint, you're looking at 6 to 12 months.
6 to 12 months. Okay. And how many resources, man people, woman people, like people resources, do you have at your disposal?
So at the commission right now, we're sitting between 85 and 90 staff. We have a lot of students right now for the summer, and that consists of lawyers, investigators, policy officers, communications analysts, and our administrative support.
And what would your budget be approximately now?
We recently were given program integrity funding, so my budget is sitting at around $15.2 million.
15.2. Okay. So with the things you're recommending are improved with the PCRC coming up, and how do you reconcile the fact that now we're going to add the CBSA to this, the complaints against the Rcmp, the complaints against the CBSA, I don't see diminishing anytime soon, unless there's some drastic change. Do you feel that your budget allocation of 18.6 for the first 6 years and 19.6 million for thereafter is adequate? And how many new people are you going to have to step up to handle both of those two?
So the funding that's been attributed to this particular bill is actually not just for the PCRC. There's also funding that is going to CBSA as well as to NCIRA. So what I will tell you is that the total amount of funding that is being given for this bill is less than what we had submitted at the lower end when we put forth our proposal for financing.
Which I would agree that I think one of the concerns I have is that we're underfunded. We might still face the same issue we've had previously, in that we don't have enough resources to meet the timelines as set out in the proposed legislation. And we would be certainly open to any submission you would have to our group of where you think that needs to go. One of the things that people I think still have some confusion about, Ms. LaHaye, is how the CRCC handles complaints now, and what role does the Rcmp play in that complaint process, and what the PCRC will how will that be different moving forward? Basically, what I'm getting at is, what threshold has to be met for a public complaint to be handled by the Rcmp detachment, where it originates, or before the PCRC, the new commission, steps in? And how do you see that working so that the public understand that there is some confidence they can have in this particular process?
So what I would share with you is that right now, about 90% of public complaints are actually made to the commission. So there was a point in time when it was about 60% and 40% were going to the detachments. Now the majority of public complaints are made to the commission. So when a complaint comes in, we have a look at that complaint, and in most cases, I'll keep this short. In most cases, we send them to the Rcmp for investigation. And the reason for that is it's a resource-based decision. Right. Before we received our program integrity funding, my budget was $10.5 million. And so my choice has been to focus on complaints that are coming from individuals who are marginalized, who are vulnerable. That has been my focus. But the majority of public complaints, 98%, go to the RCMP for
And do you see
investigation.
that changing moving forward, Ms. LaHaye?
With additional funding, I would like to be able to take on more investigations myself, absolutely.
We heard from the CBSA union that part of the issue that happens there is a breakdown between management and staff, frontline staff, and sometimes management has some issues. Does the PCRC see themselves being involved in maybe a complaint process against management, and how do you see that happening?
Well, the Commission in the past did do a specified activity review on harassment in the RCMP, so we have
This
done
is
that.
CBSA I'm referring to.
Yes, but I'm sort of referring to
Okay.
what we have done in the past. But when we do receive public complaints, we do make recommendations with respect to supervision. So it's not just the individual that's on the ground. We will make recommendations with respect to the supervisory capacity. And of late, the Commissioner of the RCMP has even doubled down on that. So I see that being very much the same way with CBSA.
All right, thank you. One of the things that...
Sorry, you're done.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm done.
Okay, please, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. I actually have to build off of something Mr. Julian just asked about. Did you, and there was a little bit, I was trying to catch it on translation, but did you say you only have 7 investigators at this current time?
Yes, that's correct. I have 7 investigators.
Out of a total staff of how many?
I have a total staff of between 85 and 90. But there's also, when we're doing reviews, those are lawyers that are doing that. So obviously, I would like to increase my stable of investigators, but we also have policy analysts that also assist with the investigations, right? So there's 7 that are specifically classified as investigators, but my policy analysis team also gets involved in that.
And could you tell me just a little bit about what the background of those 7 are? Are they retired law enforcement? Where's the background on those?
So we have 2 that are retired law enforcement, former police officers, neither one of them that serve with the RCMP. And the other 5 are coming from a mix of other tribunals or social services backgrounds.
Okay. So we've talked a lot today about resources, and you mentioned you have to, and I think I quoted you very quickly, I was scribbling, you have to bump a lot to the RCMP. We heard when they were in here, and we heard from their association too, that when they go to do their investigations into complaints, they're obviously taking frontline officers off too. It must be, do you get pushback sometimes? We're really hearing a lot about resources, and if we're going to pass this important legislation, if there's not the resources there to do it, we're kind of wasting our time. So let's do it right. So are you getting pushback from them also then?
No, we haven't really gotten pushback from the RCMP. I mean, the process is well established. It's been in place for 35 years. I know the union has made its point, but there's also the professional responsibility units that are doing a lot of this work as well, right? So that's the RCMP doesn't push back, but clearly the union is.
Okay. You mentioned at the beginning that there's a public education portion is mandatory. You submitted some documents into us, and this was the flow chart of how your complaint system works. Quite frankly, I read the flow chart, and it's still confusing. So how do we make it, or how do you make it, the process, if you're a new Canadian or someone who doesn't speak English or French is one of our official languages, how do they possibly get through this system and know where to go? I was shocked when you said that most complaints come to your office. I'll be honest, till we started this, I'd never heard of your office, but I'm from Ontario, so there's not as much RCMP. They have the SIU here. So could you just explain how we could possibly make this a little earlier, and how are people finding you now?
So because public education right now is a nice to do as opposed to a mandated activity, it's something that's done off the corner of a desk and only if I have enough resources left. But what I'd like to focus on is the fact that we've had some really big successes. So when you look at the territory of Nunavut, we have been up there 5, 6, 7 times with commission staff. The territory is getting to know the process. The MLAs are engaged. We've talked to the mayors. We've talked to the community justice workers. And so that's what it's going to be. It's about finding advocates, but also building up the team so that we can be able to explain this process, which is complex, that needs to be broken down. And that's why we have the public complaint forms available in 16 different languages to help with that sort of thing.
Okay. And I have to get something clarified you mentioned in your opening remarks, or not opening remarks, might have been one of the answers. You mentioned, and Ms. Damoff was talking about the reservists, that you said that reservists have the same powers of arrest as a regular RCMP. I was a little shocked to hear that. I know in Ontario Auxiliary, they don't have peace officer status. Do RCMP reservists actually have the same powers of arrest, or are they civilian?
So they're not auxiliary, they're reservists. And they do. They have all the same powers as a regular member.
I didn't know that. Well, thank you for that clarification. So when they're on duty, is that the difference? When they're not on duty?
When they're on duty, absolutely. And there's some places in this country, like in Nunavut, where you have members that are given an opportunity to take some time away, and so the backfill is covered by reservists. So there's a large number of reservists that end up serving up in Nunavut.
I know you're not RCMP, and this would be a good question if we get them back, but I'd like to know what training they go through then as reservists, or do you know?
So most of them are former regular members that have retired that are doing the job as reservists.
I didn't know that. Conversely, that usually in somewhere like Ontario, they're younger people who want to get on a service. And I know you're saying the auxiliary is different, but I didn't realize. So that's good information to have. So thank you for that. Chair, how much time do I have left?
6 seconds.
Oh, 6 seconds? I'm not that quick a talker. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to both of you for being here. This is such an important discussion. And as Mr. Mott said in his opening, certainly the Conservative Party and the official opposition recognizes the need for very strong oversight on those who wield considerable power to enforce our laws, whether that's CBSA frontline officers or RCMP frontline officers. I think I'm going to build on a lot of the questions that have already been asked about resourcing and how you feel that you're going to be able to manage this broader workload. And it sounds like the funding that has been announced, although welcomed, is not nearly enough for what you'd like to do. Just a few logistic questions. You mentioned that your average case takes 6 to 12 months to resolve. Is that, or to investigate, pardon me, is that an accurate assessment?
So right now with the RCMP doing the investigations, their service standard is 6 months.
Okay. And that's the RCMP's investigation. And if it gets to you, which are more serious cases exclusively, is that correct? You said use of force or a violation of personal liberties, right?
Yes, so those ones will depend obviously on the complexity of the situation. So the Bougie file, for example, the investigation and the preparation of the report was just under 2 years.
Okay. And so just to be clear then, you get the cases that are the most serious. Is that accurate?
I would like to investigate the cases that are most serious. Right now, I'm not resourced effectively to be able to investigate all of those very serious cases.
Okay, but you're not getting the example you got was if an RCMP officer swore at someone when they gave them a ticket. You're not getting those types of cases.
Those ones would be referred to the RCMP all the time for investigation.
So how many cases do you investigate annually? You may have mentioned this, but if you can just repeat.
Right now, we're investigating about 1 or 2 annually is what we're doing.
1 or 2 cases?
Yes. So those are where we are using our own resources to do investigations. However, on the review side, so when an individual re-engages with the process, we're doing about 300 to 350 reviews a year.
Okay. So when an individual makes the complaint, you do about 300 a year. Is that right? Okay. But the ones that you get to initiate under your purview are 1 to 2. But you would like to do many more, as you mentioned, correct? Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right. So of the 3, do I not have 5 minutes? Pretty sure I have 5.
I'm sorry. Maybe my...
Yeah. So...
Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So of the 300, it takes you 6 to 12 months. Is that correct?
So our service standard when somebody requests a review is 120 days after we've received all of the relevant materials from the RCMP. At present, we're meeting that service standard about 65% of the time.
Okay, and how often does it, how long does it take for for you to get all that information from the RCMP?
It really depends upon the situation. In fact, one of the recommendations that we've put forth for regulations is that should be entrenched in regulations, how long they have to provide that information.
Excellent.
Our current MOU speaks to that with the RCMP. I think it's 6 weeks. It's 6 weeks that they're supposed to give us the information. They miss that timeline frequently.
Okay. Okay, so everyone has standards, but it's difficult to meet them given the resources you have right now. The reason I'm asking and sort of drilling down on this is just to try to get a sense of how long complainants have to wait and how long RCMP officers who are the subject of that complaint have to wait. How often would you say that the investigation finds that the officer is, I'm not sure if guilty is the right terminology, or whether they're guilty or that it's unfounded? Can you give me a ballpark assessment of that?
So our process speaks to satisfied or not satisfied. So if an individual requests us to do a review, we will either issue a satisfied report or we'll issue an interim report. In 90% of the cases that come to us on review, we find that we are satisfied with the way the RCMP handled the investigation.
I understand. Okay, so 90% of the time. So they did a pretty good job, the RCMP, from your assessment. Okay. So ideally, how many more, I think you might have mentioned this as well, but how many more serious cases would you like to take on? Would you like to do all of the use of force and sort of personal liberty issue cases? Is that sort of your vision?
Like to do the serious use of force and personal liberty issues. Like we will get a use of force allegation, for example, that an individual felt that the handcuffs were too tight. You know, I don't think that that's a judicious use of the Commission's resources to look at that. But if it's a case of if it's a more significant issue, then I would like to take those on.
Okay, so just to wrap up in our last few seconds here, can you provide the committee, and again, you've been asked this, but if we can nail down what amount of funding from government do you feel that you would require to fully implement the vision you have for a complex and robust oversight system about the RCMP and the CBSI? Could you give us an annual operating budget number?
So right now we're at 15.2 million. We had originally asked for another 23. I would say that if we were sitting at around between about 45 million, that would be a reasonable operating budget for us to be able to do these important investigations using our own resources.
Okay, thank you very much for your insight. Thank you.